Today we will try to understand the characteristics with regard to the ownership of the Indian newspaper business and some of the political, legal and ethical issues related to it. I am Amrita Ghosh Kumar and the subject expert for this lesson is Mr. Shelly Vishwajit, a senior journalist. He has worked with several newspaper and television channels and is also into teaching with various media institutions and universities. But before we delve into this lesson, let me make this statement. Newspapers are just another business. Now, can we say this statement is correct? Not at all. This statement is as far away from ground reality as it possibly could be, especially if we are trying to understand the place of a newspaper in a democratic polity. Newspapers have never been considered just another business by any country in the world, be it democratic, communist or despotic. Though going deeper into this issue is beyond the scope of this class, I would just like to say that newspapers are still considered as the most powerful medium when it comes to influencing public opinion. This industry has been treated differently by governments all over the world, whether it is Russian or the US government or the European Union or Saudi Arabia, China, Pakistan or even India. Newspapers in control of irresponsible owners, unfriendly foreign-backed proprietors or non-believers in democratic institutions can cause a huge disruption and chaos in the polity and society of any nation. Unless we understand that the newspaper is a special venture whose basic function is public good, we will not be able to appreciate many of the political, legal, ethical issues surrounding the ownership and conduct of this business. The Indian media market differs from those of developed countries in several ways. For one, India is a developing country and all segments of the media industry, including print and radio, are still growing, unlike in developed countries which have been hit by a plateau or have a declining growth trend. By 2008, we had become the world's second largest newspaper consuming nation in the world, after China, and had overtaken even USA. But the media market in India also remains highly fragmented due to the large number of languages and the sheer size of the country. As per the Registrar of Newspapers of India RNI data, as on 31st March 2013, the total number of registered publications were 94,067 copies, out of which 12,511 were in the newspaper category, while the rest 81,556 fell in the periodicals category. The largest number of publications registered in any Indian language was in Hindi, standing at 37,891, while the second largest number of newspapers and periodicals registered in any language was in English at 12,634. The state with the largest number of registered publications is possibly Uttar Pradesh, with 14,336 publications. Maharashtra is second with 12,466 registered publications. As per the RNI, the largest circulated daily publication is the Anand Bazar Patrika, a Bengali daily published from Kolkata with an average per day circulation of 12,44,048 copies. The second largest circulated daily is the Times of India, Delhi edition with 11,19,088 copies. The largest circulated Hindi daily is the Punjab Kesari, published from Jalandhar with 6,50,705 copies per day. The largest circulated multi-edition daily is the Times of India, English, with 21 editions and a combined circulation of 46,40,374 copies per day. The second largest circulated multi-edition daily is the Dainik Jagran, Hindi, with 18 editions and 31,50,478 copies circulated per day. The largest circulated periodical is the Hindu Weekly with 13,15,612 copies. The largest circulated periodical in Hindi is Rishi Parsad, published from Ahmedabad with 12,13,094 copies published daily. Printing and publishing of newspapers and periodicals in India are governed by the Press and Registration of Books Act 1867 and the Registration of Newspapers Central Rules 1956. Under the Indian laws, a newspaper can be owned and printed by any legal entity, including an individual, a partnership firm, a limited company, by a trust, society, or family, unless they are specifically barred on justifiable legal grounds such as insolvency, anti-national or seditious activities, or some other legal reasons. Foreign entities are allowed to invest or own up to 26%, that is the upper FDI limit, in Indian newspapers. So, they can only be part owners, cannot be full or dominant owners of Indian newspapers. This has been done to ensure that ownership and editorial control of newspapers remains in the hand of the Indian citizens. The ceiling on FDI of less than 50% of the total equity is a norm the world over, and India is no exception. Due to India's large and unique mediascape, it is often contended that the proliferation of publications, radio stations, television channels, and internet websites is a surefire guarantor for plurality, diversity, and consumer choice. The sheer number of publications in India would give anybody an impression that India is a very healthy newspaper market, and its inherent characteristics bode very well for democracy, pluralism, and the free flow of ideas. But the number tells only half the story. The real story is concealed by certain characteristics and ownership trends, and many of which are not so healthy for a vibrant media environment. The large number of media organizations often conceal the fact that there is dominance over specific markets and market segments by only a few players. In other words, the markets are often oligopolistic in character. A handful of media conglomerate exercise considerable influence on what is read, heard, and watched by a majority of the population. One example will illustrate this contention. Delhi is the only urban area in the world with 16 English daily newspapers. The top 3 publications, the Times of India, the Hindustan Times, and the Economic Times, would account for over 3/4 of the total market for all English dailies. Some of the critical issues that face this sector revolve around: 1. Cross-media ownership, that is vertical and horizontal integration. 2. Conglomerate ownership. 3. Backdoor entry of large corporates into media. 4. Market dominance. 5. political parties ownership. 6. FDI and foreign ownership. Cross-media ownership is when the same company owns several other media platforms such as television and radio, along with newspapers, magazines, and so on. Consolidation, including vertical integration among media operations of content, carrier, and distributor within a media segment may be desirable from the point of view of business, but have many implications for diversity and pluralism of news and ideas. A report prepared by an independent institution recommending imposition of cross-media ownership restrictions recently entered the public domain nearly 3 years after it was submitted following a rebuke to the government by a panel of lawmakers. One view is that the absence of restrictions on cross-media ownership implies that particular companies or groups or conglomerates dominate markets both vertically, that is across different media such as print, radio, television and the internet, as well as horizontally, which means in particular geographical regions and within the same sector. A TRI report with regards to cross-media ownership has pointed out that no restrictions exist in India, in stark contrast with most other countries in the world with a free press, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France and Canada. It argued that restrictions are necessary. TRI recommended that the I&B Ministry should conduct a detailed market analysis in order to identify which safeguards would be most appropriate in the Indian context. Conglomerate ownership means the ownership of several businesses, one of which is a media business. For example, when a publishing company owns a newspaper along with chemical, fertilizer, cement, rubber or plastic factories, or a liquor brewery or distillery or a major corporation has controlling shares in a number of media-related business, the pattern is conglomerate. In a conglomerate, there will be interlocking of directorships, which means the same persons will be the director of a media company as well as of the manufacturing industries or the financial corporations. In fact, several transport or lorry company directors are directing the destiny of newspaper, television or film production companies today. Their main business will be a high profit industry, but they run a media company for prestige or to exercise social and political influence on decision makers in the private or the public sector and in the government of the day. Such a conglomeration may not always support an unbiased or dispassionate presentation of events, issues and personalities. The promoters and controllers of media groups have traditionally held interests in many other business interests and continue to do so, often using their media outlets to further these. There are a few instances of promoters who have used the profits from their media operations to diversify into other unrelated businesses. The growing corporatization of the Indian media is manifest in the manner in which large industrial conglomerates are acquiring direct and indirect interest in media groups. There is also a growing convergence between creators or producers of media content and those who distribute or disseminate the content. These trends can be perceived as instances of consolidation in a sector in which big players have been steeped in debt and strapped for cash over the past few years. The shakeout also signifies a growing concentration of ownership in an oligopolistic market that could lead to loss of heterogeneity and plurality. The emergence of cartels and oligarchies could be a symptomatic of an increasingly globalized but homogenized communication landscape. despite the growth of internet technology bringing about a semblance of democratization by allowing for more user-generated content by prosumers or producer-consumers. While the growth of the internet has led to a collapse of geospatial boundaries and lower levels of gatekeeping in checking information flows, the perceived increase in diversity of opinion has been simultaneously accompanied, paradoxically, by a shrinking in the number of traditional media operations in television and print. Vertical integration indicates that a media company monopolizes the production of the ingredients that go into the making of media products. That is, content, paper, printing press, distribution channel, and so on. For example, a newspaper publisher may own several hundred areas of forests where the major components of a newspaper, namely wood for newsprints, is cultivated. Some other newspaper company may own a factory that produces the bulk of the printing ink used in the industry. If the present trend of cross-media, conglomerate and vertical integration ownership continues, monopolization will result, which will ultimately lead to the phenomenon of suppression not only of media freedom but also of the unbiased presentation of various points of view. Most media companies in India and abroad are integrating vertically to sell cross-media, often acquiring or building multimedia platforms. Media companies now tend to have a variety of professionals on their boards, such as investment bankers, venture capitalists, chartered accountants, corporate lawyers, and chief executive officers or CEOs of big companies. Professional journalists, ironically, rarely figure here. As a result, those at the top of the decision-making hierarchy are those for whom the bottom line and not the byline is most important. Notably, India's established media conglomerates have staunchly refused to accept the need for restrictions over ownership and control, arguing that this would result in devious and dubious forms of censorship, and have resurrected the ghosts of the 1975 to 1977 emergency. The government too has played along. After all, powerful politicians need media barons as much as they need them. A mutually beneficial back-scratching society of sorts. Market dominance is closely linked to vertical and horizontal integration as well as dominance of large conglomerate in the Indian media. The recent Administrative Staff College of India ASCI report pointed out that there is ample evidence of market dominance in specific media markets and argued in favor of an appropriate regulatory framework to enforce cross-media ownership restrictions, especially in regional media markets where there is significant concentration and market dominance in comparison to the national markets for the Hindi and the English media. The I&B Ministry, however, has for the time being tossed the contentious set issues on cross-media ownership onto the Court of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, or the TRAI. The Standing Committee on IT, headed by Congress MP Rao Inderjit Singh, noted that the issue of restrictions on cross-media ownership merits urgent attention and needs to be addressed before it emerges as a threat to our democratic structure. It urged the I&B Ministry to formulate its stand on the issue in coordination with the TRAI after taking into account international practices. The earlier February 2000 report of the TRAI had stated that it is important that necessary safeguards be put in place to ensure plurality and diversity are maintained across the media segments of print, television and radio. Before the TRI report was finalized, during the consultation phase, there was strong resistance on the part of media groups to the idea of restrictions on their sector. Many different arguments were proposed, among others that regulation would stifle growth, that the multiplicity of media and the highly fragmented nature of the Indian market prevents monopolization, and that regulation of the sector amounts to an impingement on the constitutional right to freedom of speech. Further, some groups, particularly those associated with print, even argued that it was not under the jurisdiction of the authority to make recommendations on any matter which did not relate directly to telecommunications. This view was not accepted by the government. Having taken into account all the arguments of the media groups, the TRI nevertheless came to the conclusion that certain restrictions are required. It argued for restrictions on vertical integration, that is to say, on media companies owning stakes in both broadcast and distribution companies within the same media. The reason behind this restriction is that vertical integration can result in anti-competitive behavior, whereby a distributor can favor his or her own broadcaster's contents over the content of a competitive broadcaster. In this scenario, large conglomerates would be able to impose their preferred content, a clearly dangerous situation. Newspapers have traditionally been a strong tool in the hands of political parties and leaders to espouse their cause to the public. Swaraj and other independence leaders used a variety of media platforms to achieve their objectives. But what was a necessity and a noble route at one time appears to have drifted into heavy partisan mode in the last few decades. In many states, leading newspapers are directly or through proxy controlled by one or two dominant political parties. And these parties have been ensuring that no neutral rival flourishes in their states. It is indeed a fact that political parties and persons with political affiliation own or control increasing sections of the media in India. This trend has taken ominous proportions in many states such as Assam, Nagaland and Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu media is heavily divided on political lines, with two leading conglomerates, the Sun Media Group and Jaya TV, were started with the blessing of leading rival parties in the states. Paranjay Guha-Thakurta, in a well-researched article, has pointed out that debates on media ownership are almost as old as the nation itself. The country's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and his Defence Minister, V.K. Krishna Menon, would castigate the jute press in a clear reference to BCCL, which was then controlled by the Sahu Jain Group, which also controlled New Central Jute Mills. Then came references to the steel press. The Tata Group, which has a substantial presence in the steel industry, used to be a part owner of the company that publishes the once influential The Statesman. Ramnath Goenka, who used to head the Indian Express Group, made an aborted attempt in the 1960s to control the Indian Iron and Steel Company, or ISCO. What was being clearly suggested by politicians was that particular family-owned groups would use their news companies to lobby for their other business interests. Today, the situation described by Nehru has intensified multifold. In India at present, promoters of media companies have subsidiary business interests in sectors as varied as aviation, hotels, cement, shipping, steel, education, automobiles, textiles, cricket, information technology and real estate. The closeness between the media and corporate India has led to a deplorable confusion of priorities. Instead of media houses relying on advertisers to fund quality journalism, the relationship has become insidiously reversed. Advertisers and corporate units rely on news outlets to further their interests. The collusion and uncomfortable closeness among corporate units, politicians and journalists, a world in which the line between politics and business, public relations and news is increasingly blurred, does not bode well for the independence of the Indian media. The real challenges that lie ahead for the media in India are to ensure that growing concentration of ownership in an oligopolistic market does not lead to loss of heterogeneity and plurality. Hope this class was useful in understanding the complex and often camouflaged nuances of media ownership. See you soon with another lesson. Bye.